History forgets what memory tries to whisper through silence. Let us know in the comments section below. Have you ever seen someone overlooked who deserved the world's respect? Lucas Springer didn't walk like most men his age. Each step was deliberate, not from pain, but from a discipline that never left him. Even now, with his jacket too big around his shoulders and his boots weathered and flaked with age, there was something precise about how he carried himself, like a man still waiting for the next command. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, a paper-thin carnation gripped between two fingers, his hand trembling more from time than nerves. No military insignia on his coat, no medals, just a folded program someone left behind on a bench, and a glance at the guards who manned the black iron gate like it was the entrance to Arlington itself. He wasn't invited. He knew that before he ever got on the bus, but he came anyway. Lucas didn't speak to the guards. He knew what would happen if he tried. Not that they were cruel, just doing their job, checking clearance, confirming guest lists, waving through the suits and ribbons and brass polish. That's what funerals looked like when they were for a 4-star general. He had seen enough to know how the military honors its own. He stood still, eyes locked past the gates toward the white canopy of the funeral tent. It looked like every other military funeral he'd ever known. Precise, quiet, controlled. But not today. Not for him. He wasn't part of the order of service. His name wouldn't be read aloud. No one would lay a folded flag in his hands. The guards didn't recognize him, but that wasn't new. Lucas had long made peace with anonymity. It wasn't bitterness that kept him outside, it was something simpler, loyalty. He had to be here, not for the ceremony, for the man inside the casket. Because Richard Callahan hadn't just been a general, he'd been a lieutenant once, a bleeding, half-conscious lieutenant in the jungles of Vietnam. And Lucas Springer had carried him out. That was 50 years ago. No one asked what happened in between. Lucas closed his eyes and tried to remember the exact moment Callahan had looked up at him, bloodied and half-conscious, and said, "Don't let them pin me down here." They'd both made it out, but one got promoted, the other faded. The whisper of footsteps behind him broke the thought. "You lost, sir?" Lucas opened his eyes and turned slightly. A young army officer in dress blues, straight-backed and unsure, probably a captain, maybe younger, polished to regulation, still learning what weight respect actually carried. "No," Lucas said. His voice was hoarse, but not weak. "Just visiting." The officer eyed the flower. "You here for General Callahan?" Lucas nodded. "As a list for the guests, security's tight. I could ask someone, maybe get you a—" "No need," Lucas gently cut him off. "I wasn't invited." The captain hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. The old man had a look about him, like someone who'd seen every ending already and still showed up out of duty. Before he could answer, another voice called from the inner perimeter. "Captain Michaels, we're moving into Phase 2. Michaels looked back, nodding quickly, then turned again to Lucas. "Sir, if it were up to me—" "It's not," Lucas said with a faint smile. "But thank you." He stepped back into the shadow of the wrought iron gate. The captain gave one more uncertain glance before jogging back to the detail, and Lucas remained, like a ghost from a forgotten war, holding his single wilted carnation like it was a flag folded just for him. He remembered when they first met. He and Callahan had shared a foxhole in the Mekong for 3 nights during monsoon season. The kid couldn't stop shaking. Lucas had offered him his last dry match and a bit of rationed chocolate, called him Lieutenant Sunshine. They laughed, they bled, and then Lucas dragged him out when the mortar fire started. The next time he saw Richard Callahan was on a television screen during Operation Desert Storm, now 2 stars brighter and full of command. And then nothing. Until last week, an obituary clipped from a newspaper. He had to come. Lucas looked up again, the ceremony underway now. A group of high-ranking officials were gathering beneath the canopy. Flags were folded, bugles ready. He never expected anyone to recognize him, but in the back of the crowd, beyond the procession, a pair of eyes narrowed. Someone had spotted the figure at the gates. Colonel Dana Whitmore paused. She didn't recognize the coat or the man's face, but the stance, that posture, the subtle heel angle, the straight line of a back worn from years of formation. That caught her eye. She turned to her aide. "Get me a name on that man outside the gate." "Yes, ma'am. You know him?" "No. But look at how he's standing," she said. "He's not lost. He's waiting." And with that, a quiet ripple began at the edge of a ceremony that had been planned to the minute. But Lucas Springer didn't know that yet. He just stood there, waiting for the right thing to happen, the way he always had. The brass section struck up the ceremonial march as white-gloved pallbearers lifted the flag-draped casket of General Richard E. Callahan. Rows of uniformed guests shifted in unison, heels clicking, heads turning. From his vantage point beyond the fence, Lucas Springer didn't blink. His hands, calloused and slow-moving now, tightened around the stem of the flower he'd brought. It had been fresher this morning, but age wasn't something only men endured. He watched the casket move like a slow, deliberate wave through a sea of gold trim and polished buttons. Faces turned toward the front, all eyes on protocol, all except one pair. Colonel Dana Whitmore stood to the side of the assembly. A decorated officer herself, she had served under General Callahan once, only briefly, but long enough to hear the stories. She remembered one in particular, told in hushed tones over worn-out boots and lukewarm rations in Afghanistan, a jungle rescue in Vietnam, a man carried through the firefight. Callahan had mentioned it only once. "Owe my life to a ghost," he'd said. The kind of soldier they forget to put in books. Whitmore's eyes swept past the formation, back toward the perimeter. The man still stood there. "Lieutenant Carr," she said to the young officer at her side. "Get a name, discreetly." Carr gave a sharp nod and moved toward the gate. Meanwhile, Lucas stayed where he was, unmoving, a silent monument no one read the inscription on. A breeze rattled the iron fence beside him. His knees ached from standing, but he wouldn't sit. It didn't feel right to relax while Callahan was being buried. He shifted his weight slightly as the 21-gun salute began. The shots echoed like memories. And just like that, the sound threw him backward in time. It wasn't the sound of ceremonial rifles. It was the echo of live fire from a tree line half a world away. Wet earth. The buzz of cicadas. Screams that turned into orders, orders that turned into action. Lucas had carried Callahan with a busted shoulder and a leg torn by shrapnel. No medevac, no backup, just him and the kid with the bleeding stomach wound, whispering, "Tell my mother I tried." He hadn't told her. He didn't even know her name. Instead, he got them both to the extraction point, waited under a tarp with mosquitoes drilling into his neck, while a young medic tried to keep Callahan conscious. When the chopper came, they took the lieutenant. Lucas limped away, never signed any report. He didn't even know if the kid made it, until years later, when he saw the name rise through the ranks. Lucas blinked. The salute ended. A soft hush fell over the field. Then footsteps. Behind him again. More formal this time. "Sir!" The voice was respectful, young, but not naive. Lucas turned slightly, saw the officer from earlier, Michaels, returning but not alone. Colonel Whitmore stood beside him, crisp and composed. She didn't look like someone who made gestures on impulse. "Are you Mr. Springer?" she asked. Lucas didn't answer immediately. That name hadn't meant much in years. "Lucas Springer," he said finally. Whitmore nodded. "Sergeant First Class, United States Army. You served in Vietnam under the 39th Infantry Echo Company." Lucas's brow lifted slightly. "I did." She stepped forward. "General Callahan spoke of you once. He didn't give your name. Just said he owed his life to someone who vanished before the credits rolled. Lucas shifted his eyes toward the field. Didn't do it for credits. I know, but we owe you more than silence. She turned to Michaels. Escort Mr. Springer to the front. Lucas's eyes narrowed. I'm not dressed for ceremony. You're dressed like a man who never stopped serving, she replied. That's more than enough. Lucas hesitated. His instincts told him to say no, to fade back into the background like always. But then he remembered the look on Callahan's face that day, the way he'd clung to life like it wasn't just his own, like survival had to mean something. He nodded once. All right. The gate opened, and for the first time in decades, Lucas Springer walked onto sacred ground, not as a forgotten man, but as a piece of history no one had ever written down. Heads turned. Not all recognized him, but they felt it, that ripple in the air, like something important had just entered the room, without needing to speak. Michaels led him down the side aisle, along the path of clipped grass, past stiff collars and decorated uniforms. A few murmured, a few wondered. Colonel Whitmore stayed close behind, her face unreadable. At the front, near the podium where General Beckett prepared to speak, the honor guard paused. The casket sat silent now, resting on its frame. General Beckett saw Lucas approach. His expression changed. He stepped down from the riser and extended his hand. No fanfare, no words, just a gesture between soldiers. Lucas shook it, steady as ever, and for one heartbeat the entire ceremony froze, not out of chaos, but respect, the kind that can't be rehearsed. Beckett turned to the formation and said, "We will now make space for a man whose actions never made the papers, but shaped the life of the man we bury today." Lucas said nothing. He stepped forward, laid the worn carnation on the edge of the casket, and whispered a name only he and the general had shared. Then he stepped back, and for the first time in his life, Lucas Springer felt like he had finally come home. The silence didn't last. Not because it was broken, but because something deeper settled into it. That kind of silence that reshapes a room. A shift in energy. Like everyone suddenly became aware of the presence of something they hadn't noticed before. Something they'd taken for granted. Lucas stood by the casket, shoulders slightly hunched now, but his gaze unwavering. The carnation he laid on the flag was almost nothing. A tiny, fraying bloom that looked out of place amidst all the pomp and polish. But somehow it commanded more reverence than the 21 guns had. General Beckett gave him space. So did Colonel Whitmore. Even the chaplain paused, flipping through the pages of his binder like he needed a moment to remember where he'd left off. In the third row, a man in his mid-60s leaned forward, eyes narrowing. His silver hair framed a long, angular face with lines worn deep around the eyes, not just from age, but from conflict. He turned to the man beside him and whispered, "That's him." The man beside him blinked. "The Sprinter?" He nodded. "The one from Firebase Lambert? The rescue?" Major General Alan Price rose quietly and made his way through the rows. He walked like a man who had just remembered a debt left unpaid. Lucas didn't see him at first. His eyes were still fixed on the casket. Not out of grief, exactly. It was deeper than that. A kind of communion only two men who'd once shared blood and mud and bullets could understand, even if one of them was gone. Price stopped at his side. "I thought you were a ghost," he said. Lucas turned slowly, a spark of recognition, then surprise. "Price," he said, the name more breath than voice. "You're still breathing?" "Most days," Price replied, "thanks to you." Lucas exhaled a soft chuckle. "That makes two of you." Price stepped closer. He didn't offer a handshake, didn't salute. He just stood there, eyes brimming with something rawer than memory. "You didn't have to come," he said. Lucas's answer came without hesitation. I always finish what I start." Price nodded. He didn't argue. Instead, he turned to the honor guard and gestured quietly. A soldier stepped forward and handed him the ceremonial urn, Callahan's cremated remains. Lucas blinked, not understanding. Price extended it toward him. "He wouldn't want to cross over without you walking him part of the way." Lucas hesitated. For the first time, the moment overwhelmed him. He stared at the urn like it weighed more than anything he'd ever carried, and maybe it did. His fingers slowly closed around it. He didn't cry, that wasn't his way, but something inside him settled, like a corner of the world had finally been made right. They walked together. General Beckett resumed the service. His voice rang steady across the field. "Before we commit the remains of General Richard E. Callahan to rest, it's only fitting to honor the man who made this moment possible. He never asked for recognition, never requested honor. He simply did what so many of our veterans do: serve, then step aside. But today we ask him to step forward." Lucas didn't look up. He didn't need to. The urn in his hands was enough, the heat of the sun on his neck. The gaze of hundreds now fixed on him, not out of pity, but reverence. Beckett continued. "Sergeant First Class Lucas Springer served this country with distinction. His name does not appear in our history books, but it appears in our survival, and that is a far greater legacy." The words didn't fully register with Lucas. He was back in the jungle again, not literally, but close enough. He remembered the thud of mortar rounds, the metallic taste of adrenaline, the weight of a man whose body tried to quit before his will did. He remembered dragging Callahan through the underbrush, remembered collapsing beside him in the med tent, both of them soaked, shivering, too exhausted to speak. But he also remembered Callahan's hand finding his, just for a moment, a silent thank you, before the morphine kicked in. They never spoke again, not until now. The chaplain approached Lucas, whispered gently, "You may place him." Lucas nodded. He stepped forward, hands steady despite the years. He lowered the urn into the marble niche prepared for it. His touch lingered. He whispered something no one else could hear. Then he stepped back. The stone cover slid into place. A brass nameplate would follow: General Richard E. Callahan, 4 stars, decorated, hero. But nearby, in the memorial wall where the names of Vietnam veterans had been etched in a new section just last year, there was now movement. Colonel Whitmore had already begun the paperwork. Because one name had been missed: Lucas Springer. No rank, no medals, just his name and the word rescuer. He didn't know it yet, but he'd find out soon. A young cadet approached him after the service, wide-eyed and jittery. "Sir, Mr. Springer, I just wanted to say—" He paused, embarrassed. "I didn't know people like you still came to these." Lucas smiled faintly. "We never left. People just stopped seeing us." The cadet looked down, ashamed. Lucas clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Doesn't mean you can't start looking now." As the guests began to leave, Lucas remained by the marble. Price stood beside him, arms folded. "You know, Callahan told me something once," Price said. Lucas didn't respond, but Price continued. He said, "If I die before Springer, make sure he gets a chair at the table. I wouldn't have a name without him." Lucas looked away. He always did like to exaggerate. "No," Price said. "He just understood what mattered." Lucas nodded once. Took him long enough. They stood in silence for a while, 2 soldiers, 2 survivors, 2 sides of a war no one remembered right. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt something different in his chest. Not grief, not pride. Peace. Lucas didn't expect the letter. It came 3 weeks after the funeral, folded neatly in a plain white envelope with no return address. The paper was thick, formal, like something you'd get from the military or a courthouse. He opened it with the same quiet caution he applied to everything, holding the knife just right, unfolding each crease as if memory might be tucked inside. Inside was a message from General Thomas Beckett, typed but signed by hand. Mr. Springer, on behalf of the Department of the Army and a grateful nation, I would like to extend our enduring thanks for your service, both rendered and unspoken. In accordance with a unanimous motion led by Colonel Dana Whitmore and Major General Allen Price, we are moving forward with a project in your name. Please find enclosed an invitation to its unveiling. It's overdue. You've waited long enough. Below it, a single line: Franklin County Veterans Recovery and Reintegration Center, to be renamed the Lucas Springer Center. Lucas stared at it for a long while. Not out of disbelief, not really, more like quiet resistance. He didn't serve for a plaque or a ribbon or his name above a door, but still, something in him stirred. A slow, warm ache. Not like pain, like... He looked around the living room of his modest apartment, photos on the wall, a bookshelf lined with paperbacks, an old framed clipping from Stars and Stripes tucked behind a dusty lamp. None of it said hero. But now, something outside his four walls would. 2 weeks later, he stood in front of the new building. It wasn't large, but it was beautiful. Earth-toned brick, tall glass windows, the American flag fluttering above the entrance, and beneath it a fresh plaque mounted in bronze. The Lucas Springer Center, a place for healing, honor, and new beginnings. The ribbon-cutting crowd wasn't massive, a few dozen at most, but every face looked proud, even the ones that didn't fully understand the man standing before them. Lucas wore a pressed jacket, one of his old ones from the Army. Didn't fit like it used to, but the shoulders still knew what to do. Colonel Whitmore took the podium first. "We built this place because veterans like Lucas deserve more than memory," she said. "They deserve action, support, and a reminder that their service didn't end with their uniform. It lived on. In every soldier they carried, every life they protected, every war they survived and came home from." Lucas wasn't used to people clapping for him. He kept his hands folded in front of him, his face composed, but his eyes wet. General Price stepped up next. "I fought beside Lucas once. Actually, I survived because of him. I've spent my career commanding troops, leading operations, and training young soldiers. But the truest form of leadership I ever saw was a man who didn't need a rank to save lives. That's why this center has his name, not just to honor his past, but to guide the future." After the speeches, someone handed Lucas a pair of oversized scissors. He looked at them like they were ceremonial swords. "Go on," Whitmore said, grinning. "You've earned it. Get the ribbon clean." Inside, the center was warm and inviting. Counseling rooms, physical therapy spaces, a quiet lounge with books and coffee, a community kitchen, but most importantly, there were people. Veterans, young and old, some in wheelchairs, some on prosthetics, some with visible wounds, most with the kind you can't see. Lucas moved through the building slowly, taking it in. Each wall was lined with artwork, quotes, and photos from different wars. But near the main hallway he found something that made him stop. Mirror? It showed a soldier in silhouette kneeling beside another man, lifting him from the ground, the jungle in the background, the distant curve of a chopper in the sky. Underneath it, a line etched in bold letters, "Not all heroes wear stars." Lucas stared at it for a long time. Then a voice beside him: "My dad said you carried him out of the jungle." Lucas turned. A young woman, maybe 30, stood beside him. She looked nervous but proud. Her eyes looked like Callahan's. "I'm Rachel, Richard Callahan's daughter." Lucas smiled softly. "He was a good soldier." "Said you saved him, said he owed you everything." Lucas chuckled. "He owed me a cold beer, and never got around to it." Rachel laughed, tears forming at the edges of her eyes. "I brought you something," she said. From her purse she pulled out a folded flag in a glass case. Beneath it, a medal. "I know it's just symbolic," she said, "but he left this for you in his will. He asked that it go to the man who brought him home." Lucas held it like it was made of glass, which, in a way, it was. Memory always is. You tell him, Lucas whispered. He finally paid his debt. That night, Lucas sat alone in the lounge, watching the last rays of sun stretch across the floor. He held the medal in his lap, his hand resting lightly on the glass case. For years, he had lived in silence, not because he wanted to disappear, but because the world didn't always know what to do with men like him, men who did the work and walked away. But now, he wasn't invisible. He was etched into stone. He was named. And in the laughter of young veterans down the hall, in the quiet hum of healing that filled the air, Lucas Springer finally understood something. He hadn't just saved a general, he'd helped build a legacy. And now, finally, he had a home. Not a house. A home. A place where other ghosts could become human again, where the forgotten could be remembered, and where a man with no rank on his collar could walk into a building and know that every brick, every beam, every breath of hope had been laid in his honor.